conversation planned with our guest, John Stahl-Wert, who is just now joining us, and with our guest, Cheryl Bachelder, who's going to stay on the line for another half an hour. I'd like to welcome any of you who might be joining for the first time to the Online Servant Leadership Summit. And I have my co-host. She's the founder and CEO of Let's Grow Leaders. And I want to take a quick moment to introduce our new guest, John Stahl-Wert. He is a best-selling author, and he's a highly sought-after keynote speaker and an expert in growing great leaders. John serves as the president of Newton Institute, which is the parent company for the Center for Serving Leadership. And we mentioned John's book earlier in this presentation, The Serving Leader, with co-author Ken Jennings, and a new edition of that book is coming out in February of 2015. We also still have Cheryl Bachelder, who's the CEO of Popeyes and the author of Dare to Serve, and we're so thrilled to continue this conversation today. For those of you who might be joining again, we welcome live tweeting at our hashtag today, SLS2015, and I'm happy to turn it over to Karin to lead this conversation.
Okay, thanks so much, Becky. So I'd like to start by asking, do you think that servant leadership is counter to our mainstream culture, and why or why not?
Cheryl, you're on a roll. Do you want to keep going?
Well, I'll be happy to start, but please jump in. I think servant leadership is very counter to culture. I don't think it's a popular, widespread notion at all. And the reason is because we have a culture that has what I call a spotlight view of leadership, that leaders step into the spotlight, they take the spotlight for themselves, they get themselves on magazine covers, and they celebrate their own ambitions and own results. And servant leadership turns that on its head. It's as if you walked off the stage and turned that spotlight onto the people who've been entrusted to your care. So I think it's very counterculture. It's a big challenge. But I think as people come to understand the power in that change of mindset to impact performance, they'll become ready adopters.
You know, I really agree with that, Cheryl. And it's interesting to me that it's true. I think it is absolutely true that serving leadership runs counter to, we'll call it popular culture or mainstream culture, or what we tend to read about in the newspapers. I read recently a piece that Jim Haskett wrote out of Harvard Business Review, where he said, why isn't servant leadership more prevalent? It's an interesting and in some ways troubling article that's worth a read. And here's why it's interesting to me. I find a lot of serving leaders in business. Every time I'm in a company like yours, Cheryl, where customers are being served and quality is being served and values and standards are being served and people are being served, there's a serving leader there. So value creation is always being advanced by leaders who know that they're there to serve. They're serving their values, they're serving their people, they're serving their customers, they're serving their partners. We don't create value in the world except by serving. But it is countercultural because there is this idea that we get ahead by looking after the fittest and all that. But the actual world of causing companies and organizations and hospitals and schools to flourish requires leaders who are thinking, how can I serve someone else every time?
So that reminds me of the day that I read the first paragraph of Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. And the first paragraph says, it's not about you.
Right.
And I think it just stops there. It's not about you. The only legacy you could ever expect or hope to leave in your life is the memory of your life in the minds of others. That's it. After that, we're dead. So I just think it's a real stunning question. If we could just write that in soap on our mirrors, it's not about you, Cheryl. It's not about you.
You know, Karin, if I could just add one more thing, that it was said earlier by Ken Jennings, Ken Blanchard, by Mark Miller, Cheryl has said it, there is an old idea that servant leaders are soft, and I think we're shaking that off as we realize the results, focus on doing the right things that produce growth and cause people to grow and cause customers to get served and cause value to get created. And so we're seeing this coming together of serving is a good thing to do with serving is an effective thing to do. It's not easy, but it's what leaves a lasting legacy. This was your point, Cheryl. It's the only thing we leave behind, and interestingly, the data is getting clearer and clearer. It's the only thing that grows our enterprise and causes customers to want to come back a second time, or people to want to stay with us instead of fleeing to the competitor.
Well,
how would you add on to that about servant leaders being soft? How would you manage that aspect?
I'm sorry, serving leaders being what?
Soft. So, right, you mentioned that, right? There's this feeling out there that servant leaders are soft, and you shared your view. I'm also curious, Cheryl, what you think about that.
I actually think servant leadership is the toughest standard that you could set for yourself and for the culture of your organization. And the reason it's so tough is it starts with self-examination. And that is hard for human beings. It is hard for us to start with ourselves and examine our decisions and our work today and what's the motive. I like to say the people know your motive, whether you do or not. And the people look at our actions, not our words. And so on this slide, Robert Greenleaf said there's two kinds of leaders. The leader first on the left is one who assumes power and implements it for their own gain. And the serve first leader certainly understands that they have power entrusted to them, but they use it on the behalf of the people and the enterprise they've been asked to lead. And that is by far the toughest standard you could hold yourself to.
It's the soft side of leadership has been discussed for years. Karin, the hard side is the numbers and the strategy and the marketing. The soft side is the people and the character and the integrity. And I see it exactly as Cheryl sees it, that bringing yourself to your enterprise with yourself put second, ego put second, managing your fears, managing your insecurities, managing your wondering about how the day is going to turn out for you, taking risks, putting that aside and putting the well-being of the organization first instead of yourself, and your people first and your customers first. It's a very hard thing to do, and it's where productivity comes from. It's where results come from. So the old soft side, hard side of leadership is it's a myth that I think we need to debunk, and it's getting debunked. I've watched a lot of life cycle of leaders in the work I do. I pull leaders together, executives together in cohorts in cities across the U.S., take them through a body of hard applicational skills. Servant leadership is a good idea, but how do you live it? What do you do tomorrow about that? How do you apply that in your daily routine? I teach that in groups. And what I find is that at a certain point, and I can never guess the age of this because each person grows at a different pace, at a certain point the hard side of leadership wears out, and the skills and the knowledge and the expertise that a person brought to leadership no longer allows them to continue to grow, and they have to face leaders who are self-reflective and who watch the data and who watch what's actually happening, have to begin to face the soft side. How do I care for my people? How do I think about their growth? How do I cause them to become more so that our company can? Quick story: Mark D. Casinas is the regional manager for Ritz-Carlton Asia Pacific, and he's turned in the best worker engagement scores inside Ritz globally, and nobody has, I think, better customer service culture than Ritz. They really have done this very well. Well, he's the winner in the Ritz system, and he's now running the Hong Kong Ritz in the new ICC, third tallest commercial building in the world. And he says this, and this is close to a quote: "How can we expect our ladies and gentlemen, our people, to treat our customers with extraordinary care if we leaders aren't treating our workers with extraordinary care?" And that's really, really hard work. It's not soft work.
Right.
Well, and John, you make the important point that it's work a leader does all through the day,
Every
the
day.
week, the month, the year. You know, there's no such thing as declaring yourself a servant leader and then you are. It is a daily set of decisions. Greenleaf said we vacillate between our selfish interests and our desire to serve all day long. And will we have the rigor with self to look in that mirror and say, right now, in this decision, I'm going to serve?
It's great, Cheryl.
So as folks on who are watching today are thinking about how do they develop this servant leadership concept in their organization, I'm sure many are saying, well, what are the specific behaviors that I should really be encouraging, valuing, rewarding? What are those qualities and behaviors that really come forth to you, and how would people develop those?
I'll make a small general comment because now you're asking a question that crawls into the depth of it. What we've done at the Center for Serving Leadership, watching great serving leaders, great results leaders from around the world over about 20 years, is codified, and we continuously get better at this, but codified right now 15 behaviors that we're watching servant leaders, serving leaders practice with discipline. To Cheryl's point, it's every day, it's intentional. It's in their calendars. They've made commitments to it. It isn't, in fact, a concept they're trying to instill. It's a set of disciplines and a set of practices, and we track those through the 5 actions that we talk about in the Serving Leader. 3 of those behaviors we track inside the space of meaning. We need to help people understand why their work matters, because human beings need meaning, and we teach 3 practices of leaders that are necessary for workers to know when they come to work that their day counts and why it counts. We teach 3 behaviors that teach leaders how to love their people, how to invest in the growth of their people. We call that up in the pyramid. I know a lot of leaders who love their people, but the people don't know it, and so that doesn't count. We teach 3 behaviors inside the culture space. How do we build a culture of values so that way out at the fingertips of the organization, when the managers aren't looking, the very core values of the company are being lived out because it's in the heartbeat of those people. How do you translate that forward? And we teach 3 behaviors around focus. How do we do those things that are most aligned with what the customer values, so that we're continuously paying attention, again, out to the fingertips to why we have the customers we have. And we teach 3 behaviors in the team building and strength alignment space. It's a longer conversation, but behaviorally, this has to be translated into concrete things that we do, not just a concept of servant leadership, but a practice that we can measure, we can master, and we can embed, and everybody can understand what we're looking for in their leadership practice.
Good. Cheryl, what would you add?
Well, that made me think about something. We have these 6 principles that we have in place in the Popeyes organization, and we measure people's behaviors against those principles in the annual performance review and mid-year performance conversations, because we find you only move behavior change if you measure, discuss, and follow up on behavior change. And so I would just point you towards one of those principles as an example. It's called listen carefully and learn continuously. And we evaluate our team members on how well they listen. We teach classes on listening skills. We teach people how to have healthy conversations, which is largely 2 ears and 1 mouth. And then we teach them to be continuous learners. We ask them, what are they reading? What are they learning? What new skills are they practicing? And we find that those 2 principles of listening carefully and learning continuously have the best correlation with true servant, authentic servant leaders. Servant leaders listen more than they talk, and they never stop growing themselves. Therefore, it's reasonable for them to expect you to continue to grow as well.
May I just make a comment about what Cheryl is doing? If you saw the whole of me, you would see that that I like food, And I'm a big fan of Popeyes. I've been driving out of my way to Popeyes for years because of the Louisiana taste, that it's fantastic. But I have not liked, in the past, pre-Cheryl, some of the things I encountered watching the back of the store. Every time I'm in a business, I'm watching. And Cheryl, I see the fruit of what you're doing. It makes me really, really happy to watch Popeyes bring a people focus, which is getting just sharp, that matches the food and the taste focus, because it means that I can enjoy your chicken for a long time. But I see it. I see concrete shifts toward goodness, toward warmth, toward responsiveness in Popeyes. And I say this because people are asking the question, well, what about the effectiveness of servant leadership? And I'm watching your leadership, Cheryl, directly impact the customer experience I have at Popeyes, and it puts me over the moon. I love it.
Well, I appreciate that. We still have lots of opportunity. We say we want our people and our guest experience to be as good as our amazing Louisiana food. So it's going to be a long journey, but what you're observing is this change, this transformation in a company happens one person at a time.
That's right.
And that restaurant you're going to, the owner has changed. The restaurant general manager has changed, and they've created a new condition for the team members that are there. I want to say that because I want to encourage those of you that work in big companies that are not servant leader led. You can create, there's now a buzzword for it, you can create a microculture in your team. Right. And start delivering exceptional performance results that make those other leaders say, what's going on over there, and how do I get some of that? Because leadership is one leader at a time, investing in these changed behaviors in a way that impacts the environment for performance. And that can be you in your organization.
I am such a strong believer in that. I worked for Verizon for 20 years, and that's a very big company. And there is so much you can just impact by just the channel you're managing or just the team you're managing. And those pockets become contagious because what you see is people say, well, how are they getting these results? And then when somebody explains it, everyone, and also the A players want to come work for that person, right?
That's right.
Right. Result is treating their team with respect, and they're growing under them. So
that's
great.
Exactly true.
All right. My last question for you before we open it up is, what are the most important results you see servant leaders producing? Are there a couple of results that really you think are impacted most strongly by servant leadership style?
My. So a couple. People grow. Jim Collins was right. In fact, let me just focus on this. Collins was correct that when he did Good to Great research, that the greatest companies on earth are going to be great because a lot of people are showing up with the intent upon doing great things at work that day, beyond job description, beyond what the manager has said, because they carry the heart and the ethos and the standards and a passion for what they do. The question is, how do we get human beings to show up that way? And so one of the most direct results that we see in the marketplace, I see it in manufacturing in China, I see it in the fast casual business in America, I see it in nursing homes where the dollars to spend are not so high, but we need fantastic patient care. One of the most impactful results we see is workers coming to work with a decision they make that they're going to bring more of themselves to the job. Beyond what they need to keep their job, beyond what they get paid to do, they're going to bring more of themselves as people who love, who care, who have a sense of honor, who know right and wrong, who can think, who can take risks. So the change in people that, as Cheryl said, this doesn't happen in a minute. It's leader by leader. And culture change requires a little time because people need a minute to figure out if you mean it. But that's a really beautiful impact we see.
Good, thank you. How about you, Cheryl?
There are two things I would mention. I look for leaders that are bringing out to fruition the personal purpose of their leaders? Are they really pulling out of them the values, the life experiences, and importantly, their strengths, so that they come to work knowing why they came and why they're excited to be there, and with a level of commitment that's well beyond the money, the company name, or any other thing we can provide. And so I look first to see if that leader is instilling and bringing out personal purpose. And then the second thing I look for is a leader committed to developing leaders to come after them. This weekend I heard somebody say, look at the leader ahead of you to learn from, and look behind to see who you can teach behind you. And that's what I want to see in my leaders. I have a favorite quote that says, leaders are made by other leaders who go on to make yet more leaders. It's from Albert Mohler and The Conviction to Lead. And it's a fabulous charge to each of us to do our part to make sure we're training up next generation servant leaders.
Beautiful. Thank you both so much. We're going to bring back Becky to invite some questions from you.
Sure. I have so many questions that are coming in. David Paul is wondering what wisdom you have to help serving leaders thrive in the midst of the difficulties that come with being countercultural. So would love to hear.
I'll give it a go, and John, you jump in. I always encourage people. I get asked this question a lot, and interestingly, I get asked it a lot by women, is how can I lead counter the culture of the company that I work? And the first step to that is to stop caring about what other people think, because that's driving you off course. If you believe in the values and principles of servant leadership culture, then stop worrying about what other people think of you and go about your leadership in a way that will create mystery and intrigue around your amazing performance results, and let it take care of itself.
I'm just going to jump right in with Cheryl on this. Hi, David. What I do is I love to watch leaders who've become extraordinary and dig into how they did that and what they learned and what they do. And almost to a person, leaders who've been at it for 20, 30, even 40 years and who are now extraordinary servant leaders at the helm of world-class companies, at the beginning, they thought that their way of leading was not going to work. But they did it anyway. And I know several stories where founders of some of the world's largest companies, in fact, the founder, when he created his company, he shares this story with me each time I visit. He told his wife, I'm going to lead according to the principles that I've been taught in my faith tradition. He was reading the texts of servant leadership from the Christian New Testament. And he said to his wife, I'm sorry, but we're going to be poor. But he did it anyway. And I hear this again and again. And so Cheryl's advice to get off the comparison game and to follow our convictions is really, really strong. We pay a price for leadership, whether we're heavy on the thumb or kind and generous. Either way, we pay a price. So suffering is in the soup of leadership, regardless how we do it. And if that's the case, then why don't we pay the price of being a servant leader and a results leader and a leader who lifts up others and cares for customers?
Thanks. I love this question from Marcia. She's wondering how leaders respond to employees who feel entitled for the many ways leaders are serving. So, how can you deal with this issue of entitlement if you want to be serving others?
Directly, I'm not sure how to deal with it. I'd want to deal with the behaviors rather than the feeling they have of entitlement. There are behaviors that are required, and so when we implement serving leadership inside a company, when we establish our values about who's first, customer, others, standards, values, when we do that, then we behavioralize those. What that means, entitlement feeling person, is that when you walk into the team, we expect you to think about the well-being of others before pounding your fist on the table. When you go to the customer, their experience is going to need to matter more than yours. We need to behavioralize these things show them the behaviors that we expect in our company, and then track and monitor, coach them. If a person has an entitlement worldview in which it's all about them, that will show up in their behaviors even against all of our coaching. They can insist over the course of months to elect themselves out off the team because they want to stick to the behaviors that are about them. But I don't know how to directly impact the entitlement issue, or I'm not getting enough, but I do know how to take on the behaviors that manifest, and we really need to make those clear so we can ask people to live up to them.
Cheryl, do you have any thoughts?
You know, this question actually comes up quite a lot with the millennial generation that's very ambitious and enthusiastic for fast progressing through organizations, and that's good in many, many ways. But they are also a purpose-driven generation. They want to do work that matters. They want to make a difference in the world. So I think that's the counterpoint to entitlement. If you, in fact, want to do purposeful work that leaves a legacy, you've got to learn to set aside self on the way to that path. And you've got to believe, and this is the part that probably takes some convincing and some maturity, you've got to believe that over time you will be best served by serving others first on the way to that purposeful, important work that matters. So I think you challenge the young entitled person with their other conviction, which is work should matter.
That's very helpful, Cheryl. So I want to go back to the question that Karin had asked about people having a view that servant leaders or serving leaders are soft. Bernadette is wondering, how do you deal with or how do you answer that objection when someone doesn't see you as strong because you serve?
Well, I probably get that feedback on two levels, servant leadership and being a female. Females are viewed as softer. And we don't speak as loudly, and we don't pound the table as often, and those kinds of things. And so I take this one a little bit personally, that I think that we ought to be able to deliver performance results through people and be respected and valued for that. And that these subtle differences in our style and how we do that are set aside. I once had a boss who on one day told me that I needed to pound the table and swear to be a more effective leader, and then the next day he told me I was being too emotional. And so I said, well, you can't have it both ways. We have to lead out of our authentic selves, and that's one of the days I decided I wasn't working for him anymore. I was working for my values and beliefs on how you treat people, how you give direction to people, and in my opinion, you don't need to pound on the table or swear to be an effective, convincing, compelling leader. In fact, most people in my value system are influenced by people who they wish they could be more like. If we could just hear that people want to work for people that they wish they could be more like that. They want to aspire to be better people, and that ought to be the governor on our behavior.
And just to underscore, Cheryl said it several times, and I heard it from the prior panelists, that serving leaders are serving very important purposes. There's a mission, there's a set of objectives that must be reached, there are customers that we want to build things for that work because the customer matters, and servant leadership isn't be nice leadership. And so we have to get very clear about that. Serving leadership is about putting things that matter, purpose, meaning, values, customers, people first. And so I that to become a servant leader is to take a course in becoming nicer. I like niceness, but it's about our values. And serving leaders do some pretty tough things because they remember what matters and they serve it.
Thanks so much.
Well, Jim Collins, Becky, says it this way. He says, servant leaders have terrifying iron will for the enterprise, not themselves.
Sorry, we had a few extra slides in this half hour that we didn't quite get to, and we need to move into our next conversation and welcome our next guest, Matt Tenney. Matt, if you can hear my voice, we're going to welcome